Oh, well, unfortunately, Warren's not able to join us today. Some technical difficulties on his end. We've spoken to him off camera. We will reschedule. However, we did promote this discussion. I don't want anyone to accuse us of a bait and switch. Just some technical issues. We didn't lure you in with Warren and then deprive you of him. We'll have a discussion for another 20, 30 minutes or so, answer some questions, and I promise you we will bring Warren back on the show. We love Warren here. He's been on multiple times. It just unfortunately didn't work out today. But anyway, Joannes, the topic we were going to discuss today was a semi-formal exchange of ideas on what exactly a decision is. You've recently written a book. You dedicated a whole chapter, I believe it's chapter 8, to decisions. So you progressively build through the entire book to what a decision is. For people who have not read, what is a tight, concrete definition of a decision, and what does that bring to the supply chain table that isn't there already?
So in this book, I approach supply chain through the lenses of economics. And the study of economics are broadly defined. It's a early 20th century definition as the study of scarce resources that have multiple alternative uses. And through those lenses, I approach a supply chain decision as an allocation of resource that impact the flow of physical goods with an intent of maximizing the rate of return. So that's what it is. Now, so it is an allocation of resource, and as an example, if you decide to allocate $1 into buying raw materials, you essentially, your scarce resource is $1, and you exchange that for raw materials. If then you decide to have 1 kilogram of raw material that you convert into a finished product, that's again an allocation of resource. And if you decide to move the finished product from one location to another location, that's another decision. And the reason why I emphasize those decisions, it is because decisions are introduced as a counterpart to numerical artifacts. In fact, the reason why I put this emphasis on a very specific class of decisions. It's not about decision science with all the types of decisions. It's not about all the things that I would say guide the human action. I take a very narrow approach of a specific type of decision that impact the flow of physical goods in a specific fashion, which is allocation of scarce resources. And the reason is that because it gives us a clear focus on what is important. Now, what is important, that I argue in this book, are those decisions. And what is conversely not so important or even completely unimportant are the numerical artifacts. And the numerical artifacts are all the transient calculation that you will do to get to this calculation. And that can be a forecast, that can be a service level, that can be a safety stock. All those things are numerical artifacts that may or may not be contributing to a final decision. But the only thing that is tangible and impactful for your company, consequential, is the decision.
When you listed numerical artifacts, you included a forecast and safety stocks. You see those as equivalent in terms of their numerical artifactness? Because most people would argue that a forecast is a vital input, whereas a safety stock is something you add later.
No. Again, a forecast is an abstraction. If I forecast 1,000, but I decide that I will only produce 100, is my forecast really impactful? Not really. If I forecast 10 and I also decide to produce 100, what is the reality? The reality is what I've produced or what I've purchased or what I've moved. And it very much happens frequently that people forecast something and then do something else. For many reasons. It could be, for example, if you have intermittent demand, you forecast 0.2. Okay, 0.2 units are going to be demanded during the next lead time. And you order one, that 5 times your forecast. And then, conversely, you forecast 10, but you have a minimal order quantity at 200. So you order 200. And You see, the idea that that your decisions are strictly correlated to the forecast is nonsense. It is not the case. And same thing for service level, same thing for safety stocks. All of that, what I'm saying is that there are intermediate steps that are transient and they are loosely connected to the decisions. And the point that I make in this book is that the only things that are truly consequential and that must be assessed are the decisions. The fact that you have tons of intermediate steps, yes, they are necessary, obviously, to get to compute the rate of return of a potential of an option, which is a candidate decision. You need to have many intermediate steps, but what I'm saying is that you cannot put on the same level those intermediate steps that are just technicalities with the final product, which is what you actually decide. And the problem that I see in the quasi-totality of companies is that the companies get completely sidetracked into chasing tons of intermediate numbers that are very, very loosely correlated to their final decisions.
Intermediaries?
For a whole variety,
for example?
Service level, safety stocks, forecast, budgets, etc., etc. All of those numbers are, again, they are numerical artifacts. They do not drive flow allocation directly, very indirectly at best.
Well, again, so for anyone listening who likes the theory and agrees with this in concept, that's great. Making it concrete on like a day-to-day basis, like what are the, like how do you see your definition of decisions actually changing how people would operate, let's say, tomorrow morning? Like what changes when they go to work, they open up an Excel spreadsheet or whatever they operate with? What changes with this new focus, this new perspective?
First, if you don't pay attention to decisions, what happened in many companies, and I've seen many, is that you have, let's say, an s&op process, and it takes a massive amount of time from salespeople who are filling a zillion spreadsheets, and with a massive sandbagging effect. So you have people in sales who want to exceed expectations, so they are going to put very low numbers. Okay, so you end up with, you collate all of that, which is garbage, and then that will create your forecast, which is sandbagged like crazy. Then people will, obviously, top management will realize that they will inflate the forecast so that it's back to something that kind of makes sense. And then we will push it to production, and production will do the exact opposite. They will inflate the forecast so that they can have extra capacity. You have plenty of bias. And at the end of the day, there will be a budgeting exercise that is, a tug of war between various departments. And then decisions will be made. And when you look at that, essentially, very frequently what happens is that the decision is made completely disregarding everything that has been done forecasting-wise. So those numerical artifacts, what I see in most companies is that there will be tons of efforts, the numbers will literally be thrown away, and then the decision will be made. And that's it. That's why I say it's an artifact. It's a little bit irrelevant because very frequently the person that takes the decision at the end of the day is not even really subordinate to those numbers, and very frequently for good reason, because the person making the decision is frequently taking a lot of I would say of liberty with regard to those numbers, and again for good reasons. And that's what I'm saying. Those are numerical artifacts. Yes, you have those numbers, but they are not real. They are artifacts. They do not drive directly your decisions. At best, they are kind of treated like semi-interesting indicators. That's what happens in the vast majority of companies. And by the way, one litmus test to see if those elements were truly consequential, then that would mean that you would have end-to-end automation. Because why don't you have end-to-end decision automation in most companies, the quasi-totality of, in fact, supply chains nowadays? The answer is precisely because those numerical artifacts are only loosely correlated to the decisions. If you had a strict correlation, then from the forecast, you could go straight to the decision, so the flow allocation, and it would be a complete one-to-one match, and that's it. It never happens like that. In the quasi-totality of companies, there is it's an extensively manual process, precisely because fundamentally decisions have very little to do in practice with the numerical artifacts. And when I say numerical artifact, there are plenty of others. ABC classes, that would be another numerical artifacts. Products classified as top sellers or slow movers, also products classified as new or old, all the classification that you can add to the products, that would be also numerical artifacts.
So there's a few points. I'll take these in order. So again, just to represent the other side a little bit, when you said that these numerical artifacts, these sort of transient numbers that people give value to, but might not have value in reality, or maybe only indirect indications of value. You said they're at best semi-interesting indicators. The obvious challenge to that is, well, look, maybe I operate a $10 billion company, and we use these semi-interesting indicators, and you know what? We grow year on year, turnovers, everything's great. Maybe it could be better, but it's working. How do you respond to
that? That's the problem with supply chain, is that fundamentally your performance should always be subject to counterfactuals. So yes, you can be very successful despite doing crazy bad things in supply chain. For example, Nike almost went bankrupt 2004 with a completely dysfunctional supply chain optimization project with a company called I2, which has been acquired, but basically the whole thing blew to pieces almost 2 decades ago. So fundamentally, you can have two things. You can have a brand, Nike, worldwide success, massive success, and at the same time, completely dysfunctional supply chains with dismal decisions being made, dismal implementation, and something that was so dysfunctional it almost killed the company. So you see, and very frequently, that's the point, is that if you have a very good product, very good branding, you can afford to be very inefficient supply chain wise. It will still work. And you see, the thing is that also supply chain is, most of the problems are self-correcting. If you overshoot massively, you will have excess stock, but at some point you will realize that you have too much, so you will just slow down and you will just incur massive stock. But as long as it doesn't bankrupt your company, you will survive. Same thing for stockouts. You can have massive stockouts and you survive. And again, for example, it's very difficult. That's why you have to think in terms of counterfactuals. Let's take, I don't know, a company like Airbus that has now something like 8 years of backlog. So Airbus has 8 years of backlog to deliver their planes. So Airbus is doing very well, but the counterfactual would be, what if they had anticipated that, and instead of having 8 years of backlog, they had done everything with years in advance, so that they would have only 2 years of backlog. Would it be better? Probably. They would have made much more money, and they would have completely crushed volume-wise Boeing. So right now the Airbus is now a little bit ahead of Boeing, but volume-wise, if they had done that, they would be triple what Boeing does. Is it sustainable? Maybe not. Maybe Airbus is wise to not invest more in capacity and just deal with those 8 years of thing. But you see, what I'm saying is that we can only assess the performance by looking at the counterfactuals. What else could have been done? And so my take is that many companies, yes, they do just fine, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't do much better. An example would be, again, look at, for example, Walmart. Walmart is doing fine, but they were in a position to completely crush Amazon if in the late 90s, they had actually they had gone strong on e-commerce. Amazon was nothing. They could have crushed Amazon easily. They did not. So the counterfactual is that Walmart completely missed the early wave of e-commerce. That is so it is a correct assessment that yes, despite Walmart being generally quite successful, nonetheless they missed massively on the opportunity. So that's how you should think of supply chain. The counterfactual is that, yes, the company that your company is working fine, just mean that you're not doing things that are so dismal that it would bankrupt your company. But it doesn't mean that supply chain wise you are doing things that are working very well. And actually, my observation is that for many supply chains, the company is doing well despite very very inefficient, I would say unprofitable supply chain decisions.
Well, this is going to be a short monologue that ends in a question, but you raised a point there that I think addresses something Lokad receives as a bit of pushback very often, which is the way we present ideas can seem to people as if we're saying what you're doing is completely dumb, or like what you're doing is completely wrong, when in fact, as you just said, your own words, if I could collapse that, it would be essentially two things can be true simultaneously. What you're doing might be working, but essentially you're leaving money on the table, or in other words, what you're doing, you could definitely do a little bit better. That's it. We're not saying you're stupid, we're not saying it's wrong, but better decisions, at worst, better decisions reduces the money you leave on the table. Would you say that's a fairer summary?
Yes, and until you adopt an economic perspective centered on the decisions, you haven't even started to optimize anything. You see, it's by definition, when you optimize, you mean you have a target. And what we say is that if your target is not expressed in dollars or euros, you're not even doing an economic optimization. You're optimizing for something else. Why would this something else has any correlation with your profitability? I mean, you see, if I say that I am chasing a metric that has nothing to do with the dollars or euros, let's say a percentage of error, why would this correlate nicely with the profit? It's very strange. It's very strange. I mean, you have no reason to think that you would do that. And my take is that very frequently, because companies are chasing numerical artifacts, like let's say service level, ABC analysis, whatever, it's not even in the realm of possibility to have an economic lens. Because you see, you cannot say, I do an ABC classification, and then I attribute to this classification an economic rate of return, precisely because it's a numerical artifact. The only thing that where you can logically have an economic rate of return is something concrete, something that is tangible, something that really move the scarce resources of your that are flowing through your supply chain.
Well, again, just to push back, some might argue that the numerical artifacts you're describing have baked into them a sort of economic optimization focus. So, for example, safety stocks. By applying a safety stock formula, well, I don't order any more than would be damaging to my bottom line. Like, I need a certain amount to maintain service levels, but I don't order 1 million extra units because that would be mental. So there's some degree of financial optimization happening there. What do you say to that?
So there is some degree, yes, but is it a great degree? No. Just if you have, again, safety stock is a non-economic take. So, for example, if you have 2 SKUs,
yes,
both at 90% service level, that's your target, let's say. The safety stock theory do not tell you if you have only money to purchase 1 unit for one of those 2 SKUs, which one do you purchase? It doesn't tell you. And people will say, oh, but our company has enough cash. But okay, if you have enough cash, why did you pick 90%? You should be taking more, maybe 95, maybe 99% service level. And then people would say, oh, but we think that 99 might be pushing it. So we are not going to do that. We are going to do 95. Question is why? And the answer, we feel like it. And that's where the optimization starts. We need to have an economic criteria. Safety stock do not give you an economic criteria. It is possible, and that's something that I present in the book.
Yeah.
It would be possible to say, oh, we are going to look for what would be the economic value of purchasing one extra unit in stock, and then from that marginal analysis, reverse engineer what would be the safety stock that optimize the economic returns. But that's just an extremely roundabout way to just do that. You see, if you can assess the economic return of the decision, why do you need to circle back to safety stock? You just directly consider the many options that you have on the table and pick one that maximizes the rate of return. You don't need to go through the safety stock. And yes, you will have, just like the safety stock, you will have something that will give you a scenario in between the two extremes, which is the extremely low demand and the extremely high demand, and between the extremely short lead time and the extremely long lead time. Yes, an economic optimization will also give you something in between those extremes. But unlike the safety stock, it will actually attempt at optimizing, maximizing those dollars of return. The safety stock do not do that, cannot do that. So the safety stock will only let you kind of pick a point somewhere in the middle, hopefully not too dysfunctional. And yet, if you are using, as it is almost always the case, if you're using a safety stock with like normal distributions, very frequently you will pick a point that is very, very poor. It will be, yes, kind of in the middle, but a very poor middle, like a very, very unprofitable middle.
Well, I just see there are 30 people who are watching live now, so I should just point out anyone tuning in and thinking, well, Warren, you look very young these days.
Thank you very much for your patience, guys.
Just to be clear, we're not hiding Warren. There were some technical difficulties. We're going to reschedule. You have not been baited and switched upon. And in fact, you mentioned a lot of really interesting safety stock information there. We're going to do an episode on safety stocks next week. So I'm going to push forward with the decisions related discussion. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, and we were going to discuss with Warren, was the sort of invisible cost of decisions. So the opportunity cost. You've spoken about the concrete allocation of resources, but one of the things that we were going to discuss was the idea of the reversibility of a decision. Like, if you take a decision today, I'm going to order X amount, is it possible for me to change my mind and make a better decision at a later date? For example, tomorrow or next week. My feeling is that, well, I'm not going to say, what is your feeling on the reversibility of the decisions that you take today? Parentheses, this is about opportunity cost.
So fundamentally, the way I approach that through the book is, again, through the economic lenses. And in economics, you approach that through the notion of shadow prices. I call them, in the fourth chapter, they're called shadow valuations. But the idea of a shadow prices, a shadow price or shadow valuation, is that you want a proxy for, I would say, distant consequences for your action. So what do I mean by that? If you have a stock out, there is the immediate consequence, which is you lack the gross margin that would have been generated if you were selling the product, for example. But there is also further reaching consequences. That is, maybe some clients will churn, and so you miss on their revenues. Now, if we were having like a predictive machine that could go all the way indefinitely to the future, we would stimulate the far-reaching consequence of any given decision. And so we would be able to assess that, for example, missing out on a client today will have impact tomorrow, next year, a decade from now. And we could just bring all those elements back to assess what will be the net impact today. In practice, doing it that way is very frequently impractical. It's difficult. For example, if you're doing B2B retail, you don't want to simulate the next 20 years of business, to simulate the very slow churn that you will accelerated churn that you will get if you have too many stockouts. It is impractical. Thus, you use a proxy for that, and that are the notion of shadow prices. A typical one would be stockout penalty. That's one that Lokad very frequently used. It is an amount of money, let's say in dollars, that is assumed that is the opportunities that what we lost beyond gross margin. Maybe when there is a stockout, in most situations, the customer do not charge you for an actual penalty. So if you look at the ledger, there is nothing in the books that say that there was a penalty. But nevertheless, common sense dictates that if you inflict too many stockouts to a loyal client, at some point the client will cease to be loyal and will go elsewhere.
Yeah.
So this and you could potentially think, if you had like a predictive machines that can run indefinitely in the future, you could simulate all of that and compute all of that, just part of, I would say, the predictive machinery. It is difficult to execute in practice because we are talking of stuff that unfold very slowly, potentially over like a decade or more. Thus, the idea of in practice, it is a better solution, more practical, more efficient in practice, is to use those shadow prices, where you will have a semi-arbitrary, I would say semi-guesstimated shadow price that reflects this long delayed impact that is very difficult to quantify immediately, but that still needs to be taken into account at a point of time. And thus, decisions are typically being assessed on economic terms with, I would say, immediate rewards and costs that you can see in your accounting books, and also shadow costs, shadow valuations, shadow prices that represent the proxies for the delayed effects, delayed consequences that cannot be, I would say, assessed practically to really reflect what is the consequence of the decision.
Well, again, how do I even want to frame this? Sorry, not dead air, but don't be afraid of silence. How do you explain stockout penalty, which again, we discussed some abstract topics, but explaining stockout penalty in simpler terms to people who've never heard that? Because again, our audience will listen to it and go, "Oh, of course, that makes total sense."
Yeah,
but
the easiest way to do it is just do an economic optimization of your stock replenishment, inventory replenishment, without stockout penalty. Okay, just assume there is none. Okay, so what do we have? We have the cost of inventory, so that's working capital, potentially depreciation, insurance, and whatnot. Okay, so that's the cost side, and then we have the reward. When we service something, we will have the gross margin. And we can say, let's balance those two things. That's the economy. If we just say there is only inventory cost and gross margin reward, fine, we can find a balance, an economic balance based on that. The reality is that when you do that, you end up with an target inventory level, sort of, and the quality of service that for the vast majority of businesses feels super low. You see, so when you do that, you just assume that there are only those two economic forces, you end up with a quality of service that is deemed unacceptably low for the quasi-totality of businesses. People would say, oh, no, we cannot do that. This is really, really bad. Now, the question is, why cannot you do that? They say, oh, because our clients are going to be furious over time. It's not acceptable. They will leave us. They say, so what you're saying is that, in fact, this is not economically optimal. It's an illusion of optimality because, in fact, there is an important economic factor that we have not considered. So what you're telling me is that there is money involved in having a better quality of service. And where I say, no problem, we're going to quantify this money associated with the quantity of service, the quality of service. And that's exactly what this stock out penalty is about. You see, and that will be an extra cost at balance, and then you end up with the proper quality of service. Except now, when you approach the problem that way, ultimately you will end up with an observed service level. You see, if you do that, because service level is just the percentage of requests that are served from the inventory. So it's just a metric that you will observe no matter how you make your decisions. And it turned out that if you do the economic optimization, you will observe at the end, over time, a service level. But you see, this service level is a consequence of the economic optimization that we just did, as opposed to be the starting point to say we directly go for a given service level. You see, that's we do it completely differently. We optimize the economics, and over time, we can observe empirically that there is a given service level. But you see, it is the same, and that's why I say it's a numerical artifact. It's just going to be something that you observe. It is not something that is a target, nor something that you try to steer. If you think that your quality of service is still too low, what you're essentially saying is that, yeah, so what you're saying is that you have the current estimation for the stock out penalty is just too low. We need to put more dollars on this factor, because that's if the resulting quality of service is deemed too low, that's what we are going to do. And that's the interesting thing, is that because it's economics, very frequently we have situations with clients where you see the inventory, if you put this a stock out penalty that is too high, then you end up with an impossibility. It's impossible to serve the clients profitably. And sometimes this is the logical consequence that the company should actually stop serving a few products because they are impossible to serve profitably. You see, that's if you follow this reasoning till the end, you will end up with this sort of consequences. And it is just fine. It is just a reflection of the economic logic pushed to the very end, instead of just saying, well, just pick a service level and we're good. For example, if you steer your inventory with a service level, when is it that you decide that it's just unprofitable to keep serving a product that you should just stop? You see, it's not even part of the paradigm.
Well, you made the point before, again, it was in a previous context, that there are, and it's just fleshing out the point you made, there are times where taking the choice or making the decision to allow for a stock out on a certain product will in fact drive sales in something else, because again there might be substitution effects that you're just not properly seeing because they're masked by the numerical artifacts you were talking about.
Yes, and also the problem is that most of those numerical artifacts have been designed from a divide and conquer perspective, assuming that it will be people who will in the end deal with the decisions. You see, it is, for example, the idea of budgeting certain budgets for groups of SKUs, categories, families, ABC, whatever. Yeah. So you have your hierarchical decomposition of your catalog, and then you will budget things right and left for according to your hierarchical classification of your SKUs. Okay. What is the implicit intent when you do that? The implicit intent is to be able to spread the workload among many planners. That's what you're doing. If you go for an economic optimization, suddenly every single SKU competes for the same scarce resources of the company, maybe raw materials or dollars or euros or man hours or square meters of storage in the warehouse or square meters of storage in the store, etc., etc. Once you adopt an economic perspective, you see that every SKU that you sell is competing resource-wise with all the other SKUs. And what drives your allocations are the diminishing economics, the diminishing rate of returns. if you invest more on a given SKU, you will get diminishing returns at some point. It's just that the first resource that you allocate, there will be quite a lot of demand to serve at a good price. And if you push more and more resources, you're going to gradually saturate the market that is accessible to your company. And thus you will get diminishing returns, meaning that you will sell for the rate of return will gradually diminish as you allocate resource for this given SKU.
On the topic of those classifications, again, I recall we discussed that before, maybe about a year ago. The example of, again, you divide your SKUs. You can use ABC, you can use ABC, XYZ, whatever you want. You divide by a certain amount of sales and then set arbitrary, or you might think that they're important, but like they are arbitrary in that you're deciding them, service levels for each one.
Yes.
But by definition, then some SKUs will fall into the C category. They'll have a lower service level. And the problem with that is, like a concrete problem, is that in that C category, which might not sell, may not be your biggest sellers, your fastest movers, there are products that facilitate the sale of B and A SKUs. And a stock out because you've set a low service level on C has knock-on effects on your ability to sell products B and A, because things are often bought in combination, or typically bought in combination.
Yeah. And that's where, if you approach your supply chain, again, through numerical artifacts, not decisions, it becomes incredibly difficult and very frequently impossible to model those sort of things. That's the problem, is that if you've already sliced and diced the domain in a way that where you have silos, if you have synergetic effects, so two products sell together, when they're available together, they sell much more frequently than when they are not available together. Or conversely, cannibalization, when you have both products, they cannibalize each other, this sort of thing. If you have set up silos, logical silos in your process, then it is literally by design, due to your silos, impossible to factor those elements. And what we are at Lokad, the typical approach is that, say, you do not need to have this forest of silos if there is a machine that does the calculation, because it will be able to analyze the entire supply chain and have an holistic approach, which means end-to-end economic valuation for every single potential decision, every single option. And that's something that you get only if you focus on the I would say decisions themselves, and where you consider that every option, which is like candidate decisions, every option is competing against all the other options, and you let the machine rank the options by decreasing rate of return. And the idea is that you will pick the most profitable, and then the second best, and then the third best, and then you stop picking options when there is nothing that is meeting your targets in terms of rate of returns. What is the target rate of return that I'm looking for? And that's how you don't take. That's the reason, for example, why you don't take infinite inventory. It's because at some point you have enough inventory so that if you take one more unit for this SKU, it is not meeting anymore your target rate of returns.
All right. Well, again, building on the idea you mentioned, like candidate decisions and all your options, I want to represent the other side on this, because again, I like to think who's listening and says, okay, I like what Joannes says, I agree with the theory, I agree that better decisions, end-to-end financial optimization is fantastic. But I can't wave a magic wand on day one and institute or install this end-to-end perspective where like everything is optimized. So my question then would be, Joannes, in the context of, let's say, an FMCG company, what would be a good candidate decisions to start with if you were thinking of, I want to make better decisions now as quickly as possible?
I mean, first, the candidates' decisions are fairly straightforward. It's what you buy, what you produce, where you put the stock, and your prices. No, the real problem is not going to be difficulty to identify decisions. They are fairly obvious. That's a good thing about flow allocation, is that despite the fact that it completely contradicts, let's say, the theory of epics on supply chain and all the mainstream supply chain theory, it is in fact very obvious and very simple. So the problem is not there. The problem is for most companies is that when you say we want to focus on decisions, then the problem that you have to deal with is that you have a vast amount um, of clerks in the company who are dealing with the numerical artifacts. You have entire armies of clerks dealing with the forecast, the planning, the s&op, the service level analysis and whatnot. And all those people suddenly are made completely redundant. And people say, "Oh, but what about all those people that were tweaking all those numerical artifacts? It's not possible. We need them." And here my answer is beware. This is exactly the answer that Walmart had in the 90s. The answer of Walmart to e-commerce was there is no way that people will buy anything online without having the possibility to touch the product, or to discuss with someone in the store. It was for them, it was unthinkable, and that's the reason why, by the way, Walmart didn't, invest massively in the e-commerce and became the next Amazon. It's because for them it was literally unthinkable. And and again, why was it unthinkable? Because there was so many people in the organization that were vested into having those things. For example, if you are an expert at arranging shelves on the store, what do you become with e-commerce? Nothing, because there is no shelves. So you are not. It's worse than obsolete. You are made irrelevant. It's not even obsolescence. It's literally strict irrelevance, which is even stronger. And that's the problem when we focus on decisions, is that the traditional classes of supply chain contributors, and that would be forecasting, s&op, budgeting, etc., all of those things become straight irrelevant and inconsequential and unneeded. And so the main problem that we have in terms of conduct of change is just to have the company looking at that and realize, just like Walmart, with e-commerce, is I don't need all those things to get what I want, which is to sell. Amazon didn't need to replicate all those things from brick and mortar businesses because they were doing it e-commerce style. And if you do your supply chain economic style, then you don't need tons of things that were only needed when you were doing it divide and conquer style. You see, that's the key difference, is that the traditional supply chain is done with divide and conquer mindset, with the idea that at the end of the day, it's going to be a person that will make the decision for every single SKU, semi-manually. That's really the mindset that permeates all those practices, method, etc., etc. Lokad, we take a perspective, say, we take an economic approach, and there will be a modelization, a numerical recipe. There will be someone in charge, the supply chain scientist, but fundamentally, the numerical recipe will just process all the decisions for the company, the flow decisions at any scale. And if people want to, I would say, interfere with the decisions, instead of doing the traditional way, which is tweak the decision directly, you tweak the economic settings that are governing the decision. And if you boost stock out penalty, your stock will go up, your quality of service will go up. If you tune it down, the opposite effect. But it's a very different sort of paradigm, a paradigm that is rooted in the idea that you want to maximize. First, you want to maximize rate of return, and second, you will have a computer available to do that.
Well, again, just to build on that and just to amplify a point there that I think might have washed over some listening, is that when you talk about automation absorbing the selection of decisions, choosing this is the best economic return from this list of candidate decisions, it can sound like you're removing all agency from practitioners, but as you just pointed out, practitioners do maintain a role of control over, again, the factors that govern or drive the engine that produces these decisions.
Absolutely, and I
Yeah,
would
that's a key
argue
point,
that
though. Like,
with
to be very clear.
I would argue that with a process that is economically steered,
Mm.
the top management has an unprecedented level of control.
Mm.
You see, the problem with the divide and conquer approach is that you have very limited amount of control. Your control from the supply chain management perspective relies on the training that you have given to your teams and the fact that they are, very closely monitoring everything so that their decisions truly reflect your strategic intent. If you have dozens of planners in many locations, spread over many locations, this is very difficult to execute. And in practice, um, the practice of decision-making processes of the people uh, doing that are lagging a quarter at least with regard to the strategic intent of the top management. Top management is thinking a new strategy, and then to have this thing reaching down to the last planner in a vast organization, it takes 3 to 6 months. So you have a control, but it's very lagging. It is slow, and it really depends on people understanding really your intent and making sure that the decisions are truly reflecting your intent, which is also another problem. Conversely, with an economic optimization, uh, if for example you insert a new tariff,
Mm.
the economic cost of the tariff will be inserted in the numerical recipe, and the next day the entire supply chain reflect the existence of the revised tariff, and all the decisions are factoring this impact already. So there is the lag is literally, you go from again 1 or 2 quarters of lag in
Yeah.
the best case to like 24 hours of lag with regard to strategic inflection for your supply chain.
Well, again, you mentioned intent there, and there's a comment here from Aaron, and I think it builds on what you've been saying. Again, decision is any action one takes in order to reach a certain goal. The goal may be conscious or subconscious, but there is a goal, and for you, fundamentally, it is just driving profit. Like, it's forget everything
Yeah,
else. It's driving profit.
that's why I say supply chain is not supply chain is not general decision science. You see, the focus is more narrow than that. You see, I agree with this decision. That would be, definition for decisions that you would find in a decision science textbook. The problem that I have with this definition is that for what we're trying to do, supply chain, it is too broad. It encompasses everything, such as, for example, should I invest 1 hour a day learning about a foreign language? You know, okay, that is a very interesting question that belongs to decision science and potentially to economics, because time is scarce. So if you invest 1 hour learning Spanish, you cannot learn something else, etc., etc. It is what I'm saying is that and that's what I've tried in the book, is to narrow the discussion to the things that really impact the flow of physical goods. So, and I'm really thinking of the allocations of resources governing the flow of physical goods, and that's a way to narrow those decisions to something that is much more actionable, so that you can have techniques, eventually statistical techniques, numerical techniques, optimization techniques that work broadly for this entire class of decisions within the boundaries that I've just defined. Because, for example, if I'm talking about probabilistic forecasting, that will work and be relevant for supply chain decisions as I define them. It will probably not be so relevant if you include all the sort of decisions, including deciding to learn a foreign language, for example. And again, also there is a specific point that I address in the book. I say, because those are decisions that are made by a company, not an individual, profit is the only metric that matter. That's the thing. And I make the point in the book is that individuals have value scale that are fundamentally ordinals. So they are not monetary terms. And the example that I gave in the book is that, for example, for the fire of Notre Dame, while there was no people left in the cathedral, some firemen still rushed into the fire to save artifacts. So fundamentally, what they were doing from an academic terms, they were putting their life below the value of historical artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that's a thing where you cannot, if you are at the individual level, you cannot reason in terms of profit. Some people will take decisions where they put their life below any kind of monetary reward. They will take actions where they have a sizable probability of death doing something very brave. And you see, that's where I would say economic calculation breaks down if you're looking at individuals, because individuals have their own value scales that are fundamentally not expressible in monetary terms. But and that's the point that I make in the book. Supply chain is not about that. It is about operating profitably a corporate flow of physical goods. And I really make, and again, that's a restriction where I restrict the notion of flow of physical goods to corporate settings. And in corporate settings, the only thing that you can optimize is profit, and profit intelligently made for the benefit of your customers. Because again, in a free market capitalistic system, the profit is literally the reflection of your capacity to serve the customers in a way that is economically superior to what your competitors are doing.
All right. Well, Joannes, I'm just going to push on because we've been going for about an hour, and I have had received a few private messages here from people. Where's Warren? Again, Warren will be back. But, you know, there were technical difficulties. We're going to reschedule with Warren. And Warren, if you're watching this, sorry it didn't work out. We're happy to have you. But in terms of wrapping up, Joannes, again, people listening who agree, they agree with Warren's perspective on decisions, they agree with your decision on or your perspective on decisions. The question that we've heard many, many times is, what are the practical steps I can do now to start implementing this? Again, and to give a bit of context, you're a director at a big company.
You need to make sure that everybody's on board on understanding the distinction between numerical artifacts and decisions. That's the first step. If people cannot even agree on what is a tangible thing like a decision, so an allocation of scarce resources that impact the flow, versus a numerical artifact like ABC classification, you will never get anywhere. So you need to get I would say a broad adhesion to the understanding of numerical artifacts versus decisions. And then you need to build an understanding that numerical artifacts are quasi-exclusively driven by this idea of divide and conquer for the division of labor, of manual labor. That is also something that is very important to understand, because as long as you don't have this understanding, you will not even be able to conceptually do anything when it comes to decision optimization. So first, you need to build awareness. And once there is awareness, that's the interesting thing. Things tend to happen on their own. You see, again, just imagine Walmart in the early 90s. If people had built awareness and had a good awareness that it was possible to sell without a shopping experience. You don't need to touch, and you don't need to talk to anybody. And if this awareness was kind of broadly diffused in the company, would there have been really blocking factors, blocking Walmart to invest a few tens of millions of dollars early on to capture this nascent e-commerce business? Absolutely not. Thing would have just happened, supernaturally, because it would have been the obvious thing to do for everybody. The reason why it didn't happen, it was not that they were lacking, it wasn't that they were lacking IT capabilities. They had plenty of IT specialists that were perfectly capable of building an e-commerce website at Walmart in the 90s. That was not, a lack of technical knowledge. It was not a lack of knowledge on how to do a transaction with credit cards online. All of that were technicalities that would have been trivial to solve for Walmart. It was not. The problem was a general lack of awareness of basic concepts, and thus the corporate inertia prevented any kind of action. So what I'm saying is that there is tons of money that is left on the table because decisions are not treated as a first-class citizen, because people are distracted by what should be second-class citizens, which are numerical artifacts, and there is such a lack of awareness on this very problem that nothing is happening. If you can manage to create an awareness on that, then things will start happening naturally, because it will seem like the obvious things to do for the management, the people below the management, etc., etc. So do not focus really on the technicalities. They are irrelevant. What is important is create general awareness and understanding, and also understand that the thing that exists in the mainstream supply chain practice and theory comes with a very specific implicit intent, such as this divide and conquer strategy to spread the workload among people with the implicit understanding that the job will be done manually or semi-manually.
All right, well, that's certainly good enough. I'm convinced, Joannes. And again, I don't have any further questions. I've read off the comments that I've received. So at that, I'll say thank you for your time, Joannes. And don't worry, anyone who's watching, we're going to have Warren back very, very soon. In fact, next week we're going to have a discussion on a topic that I know is close and dear to your heart, Joannes, safety stocks. Get into that as a full topic. So be on the lookout for that. We'll post about that tomorrow. But that's all. If you want to get in touch with us privately, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. You can send a private email there, as you see on the screen. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. And yeah, get back to work.